Welcome back, all of my Potterheads, for another episode of Potter Watch. Yes, I know, it's completely different context, but we both focus on Harry Potter and his many exploits, so I'm going with it. I gotta say, though, that this book, number 5, Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, not my favorite. It's actually my least favorite, while at the same time, I have to admit, it is possibly the best book in the series, and it's kind of for the same reason, and that is every single time I read this book, I want to punch Harry in the face. Rowling does a spectacular job at capturing the essence that is teenager, and that is why I hate it so much, because I don't want to go through that again. The anger, the confusion, all the stuff that goes along with the hormones and figuring out your life, on top of all the stress that Harry has to go through, I just can't. Aside from how well Rowling captures the essence of the angsty teen, this book includes some of my favorite scenes in the whole entire series, and most of it just has to do with Neville. I was actually talking to a coworker the other day because I was listening, I don't know why I do a phone for listening, but I was listening to the book and she asked me what I was listening to. She was telling me how she loves Harry Potter, but she's never read the books. She's only seen the movies. And I said, you need to read the books. There's so much that you miss out on if you don't read them. And she was so surprised. And I'm like, is it really that surprising? Maybe if you're not a reader, you don't really know what you miss. But there's just so much that you don't get if you never read the books. And this book in particular, I think, is so important to Neville in particular and to his development. This is where I begin to love Neville, and by the end of the series, he is my personal favorite character because I feel like he has had the most character development, the most change. If we had a senior superlative, Neville would win most changed. But let's get into it. If you've never read Harry Potter, well, I advise you to actually go back to the very first review video to catch yourself up. But a brief synopsis is that Harry's a wizard. He has an arch enemy named Voldermort who, when Harry was a baby, tried to kill him. It backfired, and then he died, disappeared, whatever. We learned that basically it caused him to leave his body. And so in the last book, in the Goblet of Fire, Voldemort regains his body, but it was at the cost of another student's life. So this is a tragedy that Harry is living with the entire summer between the two books, and he is also at his relatives, the Dursleys' home all summer. They hate him because of what he is. So it's a miserable summer on top of everything that he's got going on emotionally. And then he learns that his best friends, Ron and Hermione, have been hanging out together at the headquarters of the Order of the Phoenix. The Order of the Phoenix is basically the group that has always fought against Voldemort. And so now that he is back, they have regrouped. They're trying to get new members. They're trying to fight him again, and they have some kind of intel that Voldemort is after some kind of weapon. But even though Harry finally does get to come and join his friends and the party, which turns out to be a cleaning party for the most part, they don't get any information about what this weapon may be. Eventually Harry's like, I'm the weapon, which he's not, but I'll get into that later too. So the event that brings Harry to the Order of the Phoenix headquarters is Dementors. He and his cousin are going back home for the evening when Dementors show up on his street. He uses magic to get rid of them, which he's not allowed to do. He's underage, he's doing it in front of a muggle. He is taken in front of basically the wizarding court to say, hey, you used magic, you need to be expelled from Hogwarts, we need to break your wand, you're gonna be an outcast. He is then defended by Dumbledore, who gets him cleared of all charges. Although Dumbledore, he won't speak to Harry, he won't look at Harry, he won't have anything to do with Harry, and this just adds to Harry's anger because he has no idea why Dumbledore is ignoring him. Harry then gets to Hogwarts only for the good times to keep rolling. And what I mean by that is a ministry official, Dolores Umbridge, is the new Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher. If you have never read Harry Potter, you are missing out. Because Dolores Umbridge, in my opinion, is the best villain of all time. There are some really great villains out there, but she is so great because she's not necessarily a Voldemort supporter, but she has staunch beliefs about what is right and what is wrong, and that is topped by her desire to rule. Like, this woman just wants ultimate power, and she wants everybody to agree with her beliefs. And so she just turns out to be the wickedest woman known to man. And so, like, I think that's what makes a great villain, is not necessarily that they're a bad guy, but they have such extreme beliefs that they won't listen to anything else. And if that is contrary to your own beliefs, bad things are gonna happen. And the whole reasoning for her being at the school, the ministry is interfering at Hogwarts. They want Dumbledore out of the way. They don't want people to believe anything that he and Harry are saying about Voldemort because they don't want to perpetuate what they believe is a lie. Because who wants Voldemort to be back? So it's like, at the same time, while we hate her because we believe Harry, if you really think about it, would you want the most evil man? Would you want someone like Hitler to be back and wreaking havoc again? Probably not. Ignorance is bliss. I love the way he stands up to Umbridge, but at the same time, I'm like, dude, shut your mouth, okay? He and Umbridge are always coming to blows. He constantly gets detentions from her, and then from that, he gets in trouble with Professor McGonagall because she's like, dude, you need to calm down. Like, you can't create waves with Umbridge. And Harry refuses to listen. With the Umbridge regime, she believes that there is no need to actually practice magic in school. So all they do is learn theory. They just read and read and read. Hermione has this fantastic idea that they need to form their own Defense Against the Dark Arts class, and she recruits Harry as their leader. She puts word out, a bunch of people join, so now they have Dumbledore's army, which is all the students that really want to learn Defense Against the Dark Arts, and they are learning from Harry. Naturally, bad things begin to happen because of that. They meet in a place where Umbridge is able to learn about this group they want to form, so then it is now illegal to have groups, clubs, whatever. And so when their group is found out, Harry is at risk of getting in trouble again, only for Dumbledore to take the fall. Dumbledore leaves the school. Umbridge is like, all right, now I'm headmistress, but she gets locked out of the headmaster's office because she doesn't deserve the position. She's so awful, but at the same time, some really funny things happen to her and around her, and so I just love to hate her. Another subplot, and probably the most important subplot, because it's really the vehicle that gets us to where we need to ultimately be, is this dream that Harry keeps having throughout the book, and that is of him walking down an empty corridor through a locked door in pursuit of something. Like, there's something that he really wants to have. And what we learn is that this is actually something that Voldemort is obsessing over, and because they have this connection, because of Harry's scar, he is able to access Voldemort's thoughts. What helps Harry figure out that it's not just a dream, but it's actually something going on in Voldemort's mind is one night he's asleep, he's having a worthless dream, which turns into him witnessing Mr. Weasley, who is Ron's dad, being attacked by a snake, and he's coming at it from the snake's perspective. So after he goes to tell Dumbledore about this, Dumbledore reveals to him that he gets to see what Voldemort is seeing. So now he has to take occlumency in order to shield his mind. It doesn't work out because who do you think has to teach him occlumency? Snape, who is almost as big of an enemy as Voldemort is to Harry. And then Harry does something that upsets Snape so much that he's like, I'm never teaching you again. Not that he really taught him anything in the first place. Throws him out of his office, and so that's that. Which is why Voldemort is ultimately able to trick Harry into thinking that he has Sirius at the Ministry of Magic. What he wants is a prophecy. because here are some major spoilers, okay? First, the weapon that Harry had initially thought he was is actually this prophecy, because the reason Voldemort had attacked Harry when Harry was a baby was because Snape had overheard part of a prophecy given to Dumbledore by Trelawney, who we all know is a super fraud when it comes to this stuff. But it seems she has her moments. She had prophesied that there would be a baby that could bring Voldemort down. So Voldemort goes after the baby he thinks it is. It could either be Harry or Neville. He goes after Harry. So now he learns there's more to the prophecy. And so therefore that is the weapon. By knowing the entire prophecy, he can know how to take Harry down. But the only people who can get these prophecies are the people about whom they were said. And so Voldemort, because Harry never learns to close his mind, tricks Harry into thinking he has Sirius at the Ministry. Harry and some of his DA members go there. Chaos ensues. Spoiler alert, Sirius ends up getting killed by Bellatrix Lestrange. In anger, Harry chases after her, and then he has a showdown with Voldemort. But he is then rescued, essentially, by Dumbledore. Voldemort tries to inhabit Harry, but he can't because Harry is too full of love, which, if you know anything about the story, or if you know anything about the series, Voldemort does not understand love. That is his greatest downfall. He cannot love. And so Harry, who is able to love and who is grieving the loss of his godfather, means that Voldemort just can't handle being in Harry's body. So he gets out of Dodge, he takes Bellatrix with him. Then the Minister of Magic and other Ministry officials show up, and there is no disputing the fact that Voldemort is back. Harry is still super angry. He's incredibly angry at Dumbledore, who explains to him the whole reason he ignored him was because he was afraid that Voldemort would be able to get to Dumbledore through Harry because they were so close, or even vice versa, that their connection was just so strong. It was safer if he distanced himself. Do I agree with that? Not really, but Rowling then tries to kind of back off of it by saying, old man's mistakes. Whatever, think what you want. It's great for the story, it's great for the tension, it's great for adding to Harry's angst, because Dumbledore is the one person he trusted, and Dumbledore is the one person who's like, I don't want anything to do with you. Now that I've told you what Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix is about, let me talk about Neville, because I just can't. I can't not talk about Neville. My favorite scene in the entire book is when Mr. Weasley has been attacked by Nagini and the family visits him. Mrs. Weasley and a couple of the other adults are like, we need privacy. So then the kids decide to go get some tea. They end up on the wrong floor, and the floor they end up on first, I love this. I love when we see bits and pieces from previous books. First, we see Professor Lockhart. If you're familiar with the series, if you've seen my previous reviews, he was a main character in the second book, Chamber of Secrets, and he was an inept teacher. He was a fraud in his own right, and Harry and Ron ended up not defeating him, but he used Ron's broken wand to try to wipe their memories. It backfired. He now no longer has his memory. So he is in a long-term care ward. And as they go into this long-term care ward with him, they notice Neville, because Neville is visiting his parents. His parents had been Aurors. His parents had been part of the original Order of the Phoenix. And then they had been tortured into insanity by Bellatrix Lestrange, her husband, and then possibly Barty Crouch's son. That still unclear on. If you want to give me your views, your opinions, I'm still open to that. Harry already knew about this because of something that had happened in an earlier book, but this is news to the rest of the gang. I really love this scene because Neville, up to this point, is kind of soft. He doesn't really have a backbone. He doesn't seem to be very good at magic. So you're almost wondering, why is he even in Gryffindor? And then you see what has happened to his family and how even though his parents don't remember him, he still loves them. And so I love this interaction between him and his mother, where she walks up to him with a candy wrapper. It's trash. His grandmother's like, yeah, just take it from her and then throw it away. But then Harry sees Neville stick it in his pocket. And you're just like, this poor kid. And Harry eventually is thinking, I could have been Neville, or Neville could have been me. Neville could have been the one without parents. So what is worse, having no parents or having parents that don't know who you are? But then obviously Neville, when he realizes that he's essentially been caught with this secret of his family, he doesn't cow. He doesn't bow down. He's basically like, so what? These are my parents. I'm not going to make excuses for it. And don't make fun of me for it. So I love, because this is kind of the genesis as to when or how he develops into the character we see at the end of the series. Well, that plus his time in the DA, he really begins to strengthen under Harry's tutelage, which I think comes from the fact that someone actually encourages him. So the Order of the Phoenix really does a lot for Neville, and I love to see how he blossoms, because you know what? I think we've all felt like Neville, that we don't know what's going on, we're undeserving, we're stupid, we're whatever, yet we don't have to stay that way, or it's not even true. We just have to accept ourselves and figure out how to get ourselves out of the mire. Another point that I want to talk about is Sirius, because over the past couple of books, while he hasn't physically been present, we have come to know and love him, particularly because he is the father figure Harry has never had. So then when he dies in this book, it's kind of devastating for all of us. And what I really loved is Luna, who is a new character in this book, she's strange, okay? Eventually you come to love her too, but admittedly, she is strange. And so when Harry and the gang get to the Ministry of Magic, they run across this room that just has this arch. And in the arch is a piece of cloth that kind of blows in the wind, but you don't understand what any of that is about. And then Harry thinks that he's hearing voices, but he can't figure out from where. And so after Sirius dies, Luna points out to him, she's like, well, you heard the voices, right? I mean, Sirius isn't gone forever. You'll see him again. And Harry's like, what are you talking about? She's like, the voices. Basically, it's the voices of the dead. It's the voices of our loved ones. They're just waiting for us on the other side of that archway. Really enjoyed this look at afterlife and at death. And even though it's horrible, there is still something to look forward to, depending on your beliefs. Some people think you die, that's it. Some people think there is more to life after death. But I really loved how we did have hope in the light of such a terrible situation. And I also loved that Sirius had to die. And here's a little bit of a spoiler as well. At the very end of the series, we have Sirius is gone, Harry's father has gone, Pettigrew has died, as well as Lupin has died. So all four of that initial gang is gone. And of course, readers are probably like, why? Why did you have to kill all of them? But it's almost like they all have to die for something new to happen. You hate that Sirius is gone, but there is a necessity for it. Not only because essentially the old regime has to move out of the way for a new regime to take its place, but also because it helps Harry grow. And it helps the tension of the book and of the series. Like, we can't just have good things happen to Harry. Bad things have to happen to Harry too. And I know you're saying, hasn't enough bad stuff happened to him? Well, apparently not. According to Rowling, no. He has to lose his father figure. So yes, it's bittersweet, but I liked it. Then again, we all know I'm really kind of weird when it comes to the macabre. Speaking of Sirius and speaking of James, who is Harry's father, the event that made Snape stop giving Harry occlumency lessons is that Snape was called out of the room. And before any of their lessons, he always took some of his memories out and put it in a pensieve. So He gets called out of the room, and Harry's about to follow him when he notices the pensive, and he's like, what is Snape hiding? He goes into the pensive, and he sees this awful treatment that Snape experiences at his father's hands. And I really liked this because up to this point, we have two versions of James Potter. One is that which Snape presents, that James is not a saint, that he was actually a truly awful person who was incredibly arrogant and selfish. And the other is what everybody else has presented to Harry, which is that his dad's a great guy. And so in these memories, we get to see that Snape kind of was telling the truth. Yes, all the aspersions he cast on James, all of the hatred that he funneled toward Harry is tainted by his rivalry, his enmity with James. But in the memory, we see that James wasn't always a nice guy. Like, he was kind of arrogant, pretty full of himself, and he wasn't nice to Snape. He did something to Snape because Sirius said he was bored, and so James provided entertainment. So not only does it make James a little bit more human, it kind of makes Snape a little bit more human. You kind of feel sorry for Snape because he was minding his own business when James essentially attacked him. And so you get this idea that maybe, and maybe it's only me that gets this idea, that maybe Snape kicks Harry out of his office out of embarrassment as much as anger, because now Harry has seen the way that Snape was humiliated as a boy. Umbridge, I've already talked about her so much, but as much as I hate her in this book, she is so adequately representative of politics, of the way that power in the wrong hands can do truly awful things. And then that made me wonder, how does she get away with what she gets away with? Or how do a lot of things in this book happen without consequences? And I've discussed this before. In this book, Ron becomes the keeper of the Gryffindor Quidditch team. And then Malfoy makes up this truly awful song about him that he and the other Slytherins just sing around the school every time there's a Quidditch match, anything to bring Ron down. Is there not a teacher that says stop? Does Dumbledore not step in and say, look, that's inappropriate? But it's also Umbridge. How does she get away before she becomes the High Inquisitor, which essentially gives her absolute rule? How does she get away with treating students badly? Until she becomes High Inquisitor, Dumbledore has a decent amount of authority. This is his school after all. So can he not step in and say, you can't do these punishments? Like, Harry has to write, I shall not tell lies, when he tries to defend his stance on Voldermort, and it scratches the words into his hand in blood until it no longer goes away. It's a scar forever. I know this is the early 90s, but I thought there were still standards about how you treat students. I don't know, maybe it's because they live in a wizarding world and their standards are different. Oh my gosh. I think one of my favorite scenes in this book is when Harry and Professor McGonagall meet up to basically do a career consultation. Because in the 5th year is when students take their OWLs. And OWLs dictate, like, if you pass or fail, dictate what classes you can take in the future. And then those classes dictate what kind of jobs you can get, which I really don't understand. When all the students are looking over the career pamphlets, they're like, oh, okay, what about a muggle job? Well, in order to do that, you have to have an OWL in muggle studies. Well, if they haven't been taking it up to this point, how can they then take it after OWLs? So I don't quite understand how the schooling works, but I digress. So Harry and McGonagall are meeting to talk about his future, and he wants to become an Auror. And Umbridge is now the High Inquisitor, and she is trying to get rid of teachers that don't agree with the ministry's stance. And one of those teachers is McGonagall. So even though she is a great teacher, she and Umbridge don't get along. So Umbridge is sitting in on this career consultation, and Harry is asking about what it takes to be an Auror, and Umbridge is like, doing that really stupid little girly cough to get attention. And McGonagall is just at her wit's end. She cannot handle any more of Umbridge's interruptions or opinions. And so then they have words. And I love to see McGonagall just lose it on Umbridge, because Umbridge, I think, in some capacity realizes that McGonagall is completely right. But she can't have that, because she wants to be the most powerful person in the room. She wants everybody to do as she says and to believe as she believes. So she's like writing her little notes, and I love that little scene, because it was a bit of humor in a very serious book, and you really kind of want McGonagall to slug Umbridge. So while I just want to slug Harry, this time I want McGonagall to slug Umbridge. Some questions I have, not necessarily negative aspects about the book, but just questions. First, does Hermione never go home? Is that something about boarding schools where some kids basically never see their parents again? Almost every book for Christmas and or summer holidays, Hermione is not home. She's essentially been at number 12 Grimmauld Place all summer between books 4 and 5, and then she spends Christmases either at Hogwarts, at the Burrow, somewhere with Ron and Harry. Her poor parents never, for 7 years, they never get to see their kid again. Do her parents never say, hey, can you stay with us for once? Another question, Ginny. This one doesn't necessarily pertain to this book, but it is something that I thought about while reading this book. So Ginny, why can't she use her brother's old textbooks? If every year, and this kind of pertains to Ron as well, if every year they have to get a book for the grade up, why can't they just pass down their old books? Especially if they're books that they continue using. Like, okay, so yes, we get a new Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher every year. We can't really pass that book down. But potions books, transfiguration books, what other kind of books? Like, why does Ginny have to get a new book every year when she's had 6 brothers come before her? Maybe Charlie, I get it. We don't, because his edition is just so outdated. But Ron is only a year ahead of her. Like, why can't they pass down their books to siblings instead of worrying about the fact that they can't afford new books? Or even when Lockhart was the teacher, they bought 3 sets of the Lockhart books. Could Fred and George have shared? Or maybe even was Percy in school then, so it had been 4 sets? I don't really understand how all of this works, but it occurred to me that they didn't necessarily have to worry about buying the kids new school books every year. Whatever. Ron, I'm gonna talk about Ron. I've talked about him before. I'll talk about him again. Why is anybody friends with him? In this book, he becomes the keeper, but his self-esteem is so low that I want to hit him in the face. Dude, Ron, why are you going out for something when you don't even believe in yourself? Harry tries to encourage you and you won't listen to him. And then instead of being sad and holding a pity party, you get mad at everybody. Talk about hormones. If I thought Harry was bad in this book, Ron is even worse. And poor Hermione, he takes out all of his anger on her. Sometimes she deserves it. She's a brown noser who puts her nose where it doesn't belong, causes problems. Really? She does not deserve what you're dishing out. And when I think through the entire series, there are moments where I like Ron. There are moments when, yes, he's the comic foil. The kid never studies. The kid has no self-confidence. Ergo, he can't play Quidditch to save his life. He lets every little thing get to him. Why do we like him? He's always snapping at Hermione and or Harry. Another character I don't quite understand is Cho. And this is a character that, it didn't bother me at first, but again, the more I read the series, the more I'm like, what is Cho's purpose? From what I can tell, the only reason Harry likes Cho is because she's pretty. I guess they get along well in groups, but you put them one-on-one and they have nothing to talk about. And maybe that's just life, where you have a crush on a person, but you don't really like them for them. You like them for this. I just get so irritated throughout this book because they don't get along. They fight, they make up. They fight, they make up. But there's never any good times between them. I'm just tired of hearing about Cho's hair. I'm tired of hearing about what a pretty girl she is. And then I'm tired of hearing about all the wrong things that she does. Just move on. Find somebody worth your time. I kind of like that there's this romance aspect because it does add a bit more dimension to the book. But at the same time, the book could have done it without the romance. Yes, it helped with the Goblet of Fire, but in this one, I'm like, man, like if we're gonna have someone like Cho, could she have substance? Hair isn't gonna get her very far. I just have a lot of questions. So another question I have is Umbridge becomes High Inquisitor, and with that, she creates the Inquisitorial Squad, which is able to dock points from students, where previously only teachers could do that. But when we first learn about the Inquisitorial Squad, we don't know about it. We just know that Malfoy is a prefect. So when he tries to dock points, one of the characters is like, you can't dock points. You're only a prefect. So that leads me to my question. Chamber of Secrets. Percy docks points from Ron for being in Moaning Myrtle's bathroom. Doesn't make sense to me. How could he dock points? Is it special circumstances because they were on high alert because there was a monster petrifying students? Or was this just an inaccuracy? Was this something that Rowling forgot about and then wrote it into this book and it did not line up with something she'd previously done? You tell me. Maybe I'm completely misreading and misunderstanding the situation, but I was like, Percy already docked points when he was a prefect, so I don't get it. Another question I have is the OWLs. So Ron and Hermione and Harry are up at the top of one of the towers doing their, I think their astronomy OWL, and Umbridge had already sacked Trelawney. And can I tell you, as an American, the term sack is not a term of respect. It is kind of a facetious term where, oh, I just got sacked, instead of being like, oh, I got fired. And so when I first heard them talking about sacking, I was chuckling. I thought this was supposed to be funny, only to learn that is the term that they most commonly use for someone getting fired. Anyways, so Umbridge has already sacked Trelawney. Now she wants to sack Hagrid. So instead of making a scene like she did with Trelawney, she sneaks out in the middle of the night with backup. And then Hagrid is like, you're not gonna take me alive. And he runs into the forest and there's all this chaos that ensues. And so the students taking the OWL at the top of this astronomy tower are obviously distracted. And then that reflects, particularly in Harry's case, in his OWL grade. And then when Harry is taking his history of magic, which, can I ask, how can they have a professor who nobody listens to him and they can't do well in their OWLs? How can he continue to teach? He's a ghost. Why don't you just tell him to move on? I don't understand how Professor Binns is still a teacher when it seems to me that nobody does well in his class. Nobody does well on their OWLs for him, so maybe he should be sacked. But anyways, Harry, taking this OWL, falls asleep. Has a nightmare about, or has the dream, the vision about Sirius, wakes up screaming, leaves the room to go to the hospital, and blah, 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 blah. So naturally, he fails that OWL. So we have two instances. One is illness, one is a distraction outside of the student's control. Can they not retake that OWL? Especially because in, I think it was Half-Blood Prince, Crabbe and Goyle are retaking their OWLs. Why are these students punished, penalized for something that's not their fault? Couldn't the OWL instructor be like, all right, we're gonna pause here and then we're gonna retake it, or we're gonna resume later? Or Harry, we know something really bad happened to you during your history of magic OWL, we're gonna let you retake it without any consequences. I don't understand. I honestly, I don't even know if they do that in real life with SATs and ACTs and GCSEs or whatever it is they do in London, in England. To me, I would be like, dude, how can I finish a test when this is going on right below me? Elf writes, spew. Hermione's stance in the grand scheme of things and what elf rights represents within real life, it's not that I have a problem with it, but it does get really annoying considering that Hermione cannot get anybody on her side, and then Ron constantly makes the argument that elves like this. Like, this is what they were born and bred for. It is the rare elf, like Dobby, who wants to be free. So I don't quite know really what Rowling is trying to convey here. Maybe it is to raise awareness as to slavery, as to servitude, as to just mistreatment of certain groups. But to me, because the elves like it so much, it's a little ineffective. Or maybe not ineffective, but it straddles me on the fence. Like, I just can't figure out if I should be for elf rights or against elf rights. What do you think about the elf rights stance? Should they be paid? Should they have leave? Should they have weekends off? Should they have regular human rights? Because they don't want it. My argument is not that they shouldn't. My argument slash question is, if this people group doesn't want it, should we force it on them? Because that's essentially what Hermione's trying to do, is force it on people or force it on elves who don't want it. So I'm not trying to say good things. I'm not trying to say bad things. I'm just trying to figure it out because I feel like we don't really get a clear picture as to what a stance should be. So I would love your feedback on elf rights. Would you join Spew, or would you go along with Ron and the rest of the wizarding community? Not that we need to treat the elves badly, but if this is what they like, then should we force them to do what's opposing to their nature? Maybe that is the way I should phrase the question. The Room of Requirement. The first time we encounter the Room of Requirement is in Goblet of Fire, and Dumbledore is talking about how he really needed to use the bathroom, and a room full of chamber pots just appeared. In Order of the Phoenix, Harry needs somewhere for the DA to meet. Dobby tells him about the Room of Requirement, and the way to access it is to pass by it 3 times, thinking about what you want. But then we also have an instance where Filch needs supplies, and all of a sudden a broom closet appears. Or in the 7th book, and this is just an assumption, in the 7th book when Neville is trying to get away from the Carrows and he needs a place to escape, I'm pretty sure he does not have time to run back and forth 3 times thinking about what he wants in order to get into the Room of Requirement. So again, and it's kind of like the docking points. It doesn't always line up as to how to access the Room of Requirement. Because when you're in a hurry, when you're in great need, or when you don't even know that the Room of Requirement is there, how do you perform the proper ritual to get inside? It's just another question that I have. Can somebody please provide me an answer as to how this room obeys different sets of laws or rules? I just. More questions for the curious mind. I think that's where I'm going to leave off today. I have plenty more to talk about, but I'm tired. I'm sure you have other things to do, but I really appreciate you tuning in. Don't forget to come back tomorrow for the Half-Blood Prince, and something that I forget to ask all the time, but if you haven't already, like, subscribe, comment, let other people know I'm here. I would just love to feel the love. Have a great day, and I will see you later. Bye. The Marauders Map. Harry is given the Marauders Map by the Weasley twins in The Prisoner of Azkaban. They tell him how to use it. How did they learn how to use it? Because I mean, obviously, I'm not a wizard. I don't know anything about what they're taught in school or the rules of magic. But were they just messing around one day and they said the right incantation and it worked? Then how do they also figure out how to erase it? I just, again, things that I like that they have this map. I like that they get into trouble, but it really doesn't make sense to me as to how they figured out how to use a magical object that they had never seen in their lives, that they just happened upon.